October 14th, 1891. My dearest Catherine, by the time this letter reaches you, I will have gone to meet my Maker. The doctor from Fort Gibson says the consumption has taken too firm a hold, and I feel the truth of his words in every rattling breath. I have, perhaps, days, not weeks. You were just a child when you left with your mother for St. Louis. 23 years have passed. I wonder what manner of woman you've become. Do you still have that stubborn tilt to your chin? That flash in your eyes when something strikes you as unjust? I pray you do. I've sent for you many times over the years, each letter returned unopened, each telegram unanswered. I cannot blame you. The stories your mother must have told, that I was a brute, a savage, worse than the Indians I chose over my own blood. Perhaps she was right to take you away. The frontier is no place for genteel raising. Yet as death approaches, I find I must unburden my soul of the truth, even if you never read these words, even if they burn in the stove with my body in the ground. It begins with $7. The summer of 1872 was merciless. 3 years had passed since I buried your mother beside our stillborn son. I had become a ghost among the living, working my claim, trading pelts at the outposts, speaking only when necessary. Folks called me the Phantom behind my back. I didn't care. That July, I rode to Tanner's trading post for supplies. It was a miserable collection of buildings, a general store, saloon, and livery stable, with a few shacks scattered about like afterthoughts. The air shimmered with heat above the packed earth of what passed for a street. Men spat tobacco juice that dried almost before it hit the ground. I noticed the crowd gathered behind the saloon. The sound of coarse laughter and bidding drew me. Curiosity, nothing more. $2 for the boy, who'll give me 3. Slave trading had been outlawed, of course, but out here, the law was whatever men with guns decided it was. I knew they sometimes sold captured Indians, war captives, they called them, though most were women and children taken in raids or abandoned in forced relocations. A Comanche boy of about 10 stood on a crate, eyes downcast, thin shoulders rigid with dignity beyond his years. The auctioneer, a man named Phelps with a face like tanned leather, yanked the boy's arm up as if displaying livestock. Strong back on this one, worth twice what I'm asking. I should have ridden away. What was one more cruelty in a land built on cruelty? But I remained, watching from atop my horse, as if some force held me there. After the boy, 2 younger children were sold, a girl and boy who might have been twins, their faces identical masks of terror. Then Phelps dragged forward a woman. Catherine, I will never forget my first sight of Nita. Her black hair had been roughly cut to the shoulders. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. She wore a tattered dress that had once been calico but was now the color of dust. Yet she stood straight as a pine, her remaining good eye staring not at the men who would bid on her, but at the horizon, as if she could see something beyond this humiliation. At her feet huddled 4 small children, the youngest no more than 2. They clung to her skirts, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Now here's a prize lot," Phelps bellowed. "Woman and 4 papooses. Won't separate 'em. Wouldn't be Christian." This brought laughter from the crowd. "Breed unknown. Cherokee or Creek most like. Woman's got some years on her, but plenty strong. Kids'll grow into good workers." The bidding began at $2. No one seemed eager. Women with children were trouble. Mouths to feed before they became useful. $1, called a voice I recognized as belonging to Whitaker, who ran a hog farm south of the creek, a cruel man who worked his few laborers until they dropped. $2, countered Jensen from the sawmill. I watched Nita's face. No reaction, but her arms tightened almost imperceptibly around the smallest child. The bidding stalled at $3. Phelps looked disgusted. "Come on, gentlemen. 5 strong backs for the price of a bottle of whiskey." Whitaker spat. 4, and that's my limit. I found my voice then. though I scarcely recognized it as my own. $7. A ripple went through the crowd. Men turned to stare. I hadn't spoken to most of them in years, let alone bid at their auctions. $7 from Caldwell, Phelps announced, surprise evident in his tone. Going once. No one countered. $7 was too much for Indian trouble. Sold to Emmett Caldwell for $7. I dismounted and approached, aware of the eyes on me. Whitaker muttered something about Indian lovers. I ignored him, counting out the coins into Phelps's outstretched hand. Nita watched me, her good eye unblinking. I didn't speak to her. What was there to say? I merely gestured for her to follow and walked to where my wagon was hitched outside the general store. I loaded my supplies, then helped the smallest children into the back. The woman climbed up without assistance, gathering the little ones around her. I felt the weight of her gaze on my back as I settled on the driving bench. As we pulled away from Tanner's, a voice called out, "Didn't know you was in the market for a squaw, Caldwell?" More laughter. I didn't look back. We rode in silence for miles, the wagon creaking, the sun beating down. What had I done? I had no need for servants. My cabin was barely large enough for one. I had acted on impulse, something I'd trained myself not to do since your mother died. Finally, I spoke, my voice rough from disuse. "My place is half a day's ride. It's not much." No response. I don't own you." The words felt strange in my mouth. "But you have nowhere to go, I expect." The woman stared straight ahead. The children watched me with solemn eyes. "Are you hungry?" I asked. A slight nod from the oldest boy. I stopped the wagon and retrieved some jerky and hardtack from my supplies. The children took the food cautiously, eating with deliberate slowness, saving bits for later. Only when they had eaten did the woman accept a piece of jerky, which she tucked away rather than consuming it. We continued in silence until we reached the creek that marked the edge of my property. I stopped to water the horses. "What's your name?" I asked as the woman helped the children down to drink. She looked at me for a long moment, then spoke in a voice rough with disuse. "Nita." "I'm Emmett Caldwell." She nodded once, then turned back to the children. That was the entirety of our conversation that first day. My cabin stood in a small clearing, backed by pine woods with a view of the hills to the west. One room with a lean-to addition I'd built for storage, a vegetable garden, mostly gone to weeds that summer, a small corral for the horses and my 2 milk cows. When we arrived, Nita surveyed everything with that same level gaze, neither approving nor disapproving. The children stayed close to her, watching my every move. "You can sleep in the cabin," I said. "I'll take the lean-to." She shook her head firmly. "Children inside," she said, her English halting but clear. "I stay outside." "There's no need." But she had already begun organizing the children, speaking to them in a language I didn't understand. The oldest boy, who looked about 12, translated. "Mother says we thank you for the roof. We will not trouble you." That night I lay in my lean-to, listening to the soft murmuring of the children in my cabin. Nita had refused to come inside, making a bed for herself on the porch despite my protests. What had I done? Brought strangers into my isolation, created responsibilities I wasn't sure I could fulfill. $7 had seemed a small price to pay to prevent whatever fate awaited them with men like Whitaker. But now what? In the darkness I heard Nita singing softly, a low, melodic chant that made my chest ache with its sadness. I fell asleep to that sound, dreaming of your mother and the baby we lost. The first weeks were a dance of careful distance. Nita kept the children away from me, watching warily whenever I approached. They would fall silent at my appearance, resuming their chatter only when I moved away. I learned their names gradually. The oldest boy was Chetan, solemn and watchful. The twins were Isa and Noton, both 8 years old with identical serious expressions. The girl with braids was Talise, who seemed to be about 6. The boy who followed her everywhere was Onakona, perhaps 5. The quiet one who rarely spoke was Diami, 4 years old and given to hiding behind his mother's skirts. The baby, a girl with bright eyes, was a Bekwa. 7 children, $7, $1 a child, with the mother thrown in for free. The mathematics of human worth in the Oklahoma Territory. I expanded the lean-to, adding walls and a proper roof. Nita and the girls took that space, while the boys slept in the main cabin with me. At first, they huddled together on the floor despite the pallet I'd made up. Gradually, they accepted the arrangement. Nita worked from sunrise to sunset, cooking, cleaning, mending. I tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, but she ignored me, keeping busy as if idleness might be punished. The older children helped with chores without being asked. Even little Diami would solemnly carry kindling to the woodpile. "You don't need to work so hard," I told Nita one evening as she scrubbed my shirts at the creek. She looked up, squinting against the setting sun. "What else I do?" "Rest, be with your children." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed her face. "Why you buy us if not for work?" I had no answer that made sense even to myself. The turning point came in late August. I returned from hunting to find Chatan attempting to repair the garden fence. He'd been watching me work on it earlier in the week and was copying my technique, though lacking proper tools. "Here," I said, setting down my rifle and game bag. "Let me show you." He hesitated, then nodded. Together, we worked until sunset, rebuilding the fence that had fallen into disrepair during my years of neglect. When we finished, he looked at our work with shy pride. "Tomorrow I can show you how to set snares for rabbits," I offered. His eyes lit up briefly before caution returned. "I must ask Mother." That night I heard them talking, Chatan's eager voice, Nita's more measured responses. The next morning, Chatan appeared at my side as I prepared to check my trap lines. "Mother says I may learn." Nita watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable, but she had given permission. It was a beginning. The first winter tested us all. November brought early snow that piled against the cabin walls. Game grew scarce. The root cellar held enough preserves and potatoes to keep hunger at bay, but barely. Nita proved resourceful beyond measure. She knew which barks could be steeped for tea, which dried berries would fight fever. When Talise developed a cough that rattled her small chest, Nita prepared poultices that eased her breathing. I taught Chatan and Isa to read by firelight, using my worn Bible and a farmer's almanac. At first, Nita observed these lessons with suspicion. Many whites forbade Indians to learn reading, believing it would lead to trouble. But when she saw I was sincere, she began to listen from her corner by the fire, a Bekwa asleep in her arms. One night, after the children slept, I found Nita tracing the letters in the almanac with her finger. "Would you like to learn?" I asked quietly. She startled, drawing back her hand as if burned. Then, after a long moment, she nodded. So began our nighttime lessons. Nita was a quick study, determined to master this skill. Sometimes our fingers would brush as I guided her hand, and she would withdraw slightly before continuing. Each small touch was like a negotiation of boundaries. By Christmas, she could write her name and the names of all her children. The pride in her eyes when she showed them the paper with their names written in her careful hand, that was worth more than any Christmas gift I'd ever received. In January, disaster struck. A blizzard howled for 3 days, driving drifts higher than the windows. When it finally passed, I went to check on the livestock in the small barn. Chatan insisted on accompanying me, eager to prove his worth. We were halfway to the barn when I heard the rattle. Winter was supposed to drive rattlesnakes into hibernation, but this one had found shelter in the wood pile we were passing. Perhaps our movement disturbed it. Perhaps it was as desperate for warmth as any creature. The snake struck with lightning speed. Not at me, but at Chatan, who was a step ahead. It caught him on the ankle, just above his moccasin. I killed the snake with my axe, then carried Chatan, already growing pale, back to the cabin. Nita's face drained of color when she saw us, but she moved with decisive calm, clearing the table, ordering the other children back. "Knife," she said, holding out her hand. I gave her my hunting knife. Without hesitation, she cut an X over the bite marks on her son's leg. Blood welled up, darker than it should be. "Suck poison," she instructed me as she held Chatan down. His eyes were wide with fear and pain. I bent and drew out as much of the venom as I could, spitting it onto the floor. Nita worked alongside me, applying a poultice of herbs she retrieved from a small medicine bag she kept tied at her waist. For 2 days, Chatan's life hung in the balance. His leg swelled to twice its normal size. Fever racked his body. Nita never left his side, bathing his forehead with cool water, singing her healing songs, forcing herbal teas between his cracked lips. I did what I could, keeping the fire stoked, caring for the other children, praying as I hadn't prayed since your mother died. On the 3rd night, Chatan's fever broke. He opened his eyes, weak but lucid. Nita wept then, the first tears I'd seen from her, silent streams that coursed down her face as she stroked her son's hair. I stepped outside to give them privacy and found myself weeping too, great heaving sobs of relief that steamed in the cold air. When I regained composure and returned inside, Nita looked up at me. "Thank you," she said simply. 2 words, but in them lay a world of changed understanding between us. Spring came late that year. When the last snow melted, we discovered that one of the milk cows had died despite our care. It was a serious loss. Less milk for the children, less butter to trade. Nita found me checking the surviving cow for signs of the same sickness. "We will plant more," she said. "Beans, squash, corn." She pointed to areas beyond my small garden plot. "Good soil there." It was the longest speech she'd made to me, and the first time she'd said "we" instead of "I" or "the children." We expanded the garden together, the children helping to clear rocks and turn soil. Nita knew far more about growing things than I did. Under her direction, neat rows of crops soon sprouted across what had been fallow ground. Trading at the outpost became necessary as our supplies dwindled. I dreaded it, knowing the reception that awaited me. Caldwell, the Indian lover, the squaw man. "I go with you," Nita said when I prepared the wagon. "It's not safe." "Safer together," she insisted, and something in her tone brooked no argument. At Tanner's, men fell silent as we entered the general store. Women gathered their skirts as if we carried disease. The storekeeper took my list with pinched fingers. "Didn't expect to see you, Caldwell. Thought maybe you'd gone native completely." I ignored the jibe, counting out coins for flour and coffee. Nita stood beside me, straight-backed and composed, though I felt the tension in her body. As we loaded our supplies, Whitaker approached, whiskey on his breath though it was barely noon. "How much for the squaw now, Caldwell?" "I'll give you $12. That's 5 more than you paid." Before I could respond, Nita spoke, her voice clear and steady. "I am not for sale." Whitaker's face darkened. "Listen here." "The lady said she's not for sale," I cut in, my hand moving to the rifle in the wagon. "Best move along, Whitaker." A crowd had gathered, sensing entertainment. Whitaker looked from me to Nita, then spat on the ground near her feet. "Lady, that's rich. You gone soft in the head, Caldwell." "Mr. Caldwell," the storekeeper called from the doorway, "I've just remembered we're out of the ammunition you ordered. Best come back another time." Message received. We weren't welcome. On the ride home, Nita was silent until we crested the hill that overlooked our cabin. "They hate," she said simply. "Yes, because I am Cherokee, because you She hesitated, searching for words. "Because I see you as a person," I finished. "They can't forgive that." She nodded slowly. "My husband was killed by white soldiers 2 years ago, near Arkansas River." It was the first personal information she had volunteered. I remained silent, afraid any response would close the door she had cracked open. "The children saw, all but Abekwa. She was in my belly still." Her hand moved protectively to her stomach at the memory. "We walked many days. No food. Soldiers took us to fort. Then men came, took us away, said we worked to earn food." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "Lies." "I'm sorry," I said, the words wholly inadequate. "Why you buy us?" The question I had avoided for months. I looked at her then, really looked at her. The proud line of her jaw, the eyes that had seen too much suffering yet remained clear and direct. The hands, work-roughened but gentle with her children. "Because you looked at the horizon," I said finally. "Not at the ground, not at them, at something beyond all of it. I wanted to know what you saw." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I saw nothing, only refused to see them. When we reached the cabin, the children ran out to greet us, clamoring for the peppermint sticks I had bought despite the storekeeper's reluctance. In their excitement, they clustered around both of us equally, no longer making distinction between Nita and me. That night, Nita sat beside me on the porch step after the children were asleep. We watched the moon rise over the pines in companionable silence, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Summer brought its own trials. Diami fell ill with fever that left him weakened for weeks. Locusts damaged part of our corn crop. Rumors spread about Indian uprisings to the west, bringing renewed suspicion from the few neighbors who still acknowledged my existence. But there were joys, too. The garden flourished under Nita's care. The children grew stronger, their English improving, though they still spoke Cherokee among themselves. Chatan became skilled with the rifle, bringing home rabbits and squirrels to supplement our meals. Nita and I worked side by side, our initial wariness giving way to quiet partnership. She taught me which wild plants were good for eating, which for medicine. I showed her how to repair harness leather and mend axe handles. We spoke more, though never at length, both of us accustomed to silence and respecting its value. In late July, a traveling preacher stopped at our cabin, seeking water for his horse. His eyes widened at the sight of Nita and the children. "Brother Caldwell," he said, having introduced himself as Reverend Parmenter, "I see you have taken on a Christian burden here." "These are my family," I replied evenly. He blinked, taken aback. "Surely you mean your household? Your servants?" "I mean my family." The preacher recovered quickly. "Well, that is commendable. Are they baptized in the faith?" "They have their own beliefs." Disapproval tightened his mouth. "The Lord calls us to bring all souls to his light." Nita appeared in the doorway then, Abekwa on her hip. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I saw the wariness return to her eyes. "The water is there, Reverend," I said, pointing to the well. "Help yourself." He filled his canteen, then mounted his horse. "I'll be holding services at the Miller place on Sunday. You would all be welcome." His tone suggested otherwise. After he departed, Nita looked at me questioningly. "Just passing through," I assured her. She nodded, but that evening she seemed withdrawn, lost in thought. Later, as we sat by the fire, she asked, "What is wife to you?" The question startled me. "My wife died," I said. "Catherine's mother." "I know, but what means wife?" I considered carefully. "A partner, someone you build a life with, share joys and sorrows with." In Cherokee, we say marriage is like two logs in fire. Side by side, they burn brighter. I waited, sensing there was more. "That man today, he thinks I am not proper." Reverend Parmenter has narrow views. Many have narrow views. She poked at the fire with a stick. Children need name, your name, for protection. The practical wisdom of this struck me. Without my name, what claim would they have if something happened to me? What protection in a world that viewed them as less than human? Are you asking me to marry you, Nita? The words came out before I could consider them. A smile, rare and transformative, briefly lit her face. Yes, for children. Not for us. She held my gaze steadily. What is between us needs no name. 2 weeks later, we stood before the circuit judge in Fort Gibson. He was reluctant, making no effort to hide his disapproval, but the law provided no grounds for refusal. We signed the papers with the children as witnesses, Chetan proudly writing his name while the younger ones made their marks. It was no grand ceremony, no celebration, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had already grown between us, respect, trust, and something deeper that neither of us had named. The years that followed had their share of hardship. Drought withered our crops one summer. Influenza swept through the territory, taking Isa from us despite all Nita's knowledge of healing. The grief nearly broke us, particularly Noton, who wandered like a ghost without his twin. But there was joy, too. Abekwa's first clear sentences in English. The day Talise discovered she could draw beautifully with the charcoal from the fire. Chetan's pride when he shot his first deer. The slow transformation of our cabin into a true home, with additions built as the children grew. Nita and I found our way to each other gradually, with tentative tenderness that grew into something neither of us had expected to find again. We never spoke of love. It wasn't a word either of us used easily, but it lived in the brush of hands as we worked, in the way she leaned against me as we watched the sunset, in the quiet moments after the children slept. We were careful. The children knew, of course, but to the outside world, we maintained the fiction that ours was an arrangement of convenience. When we went to town, increasingly rare as the years passed, Nita rode in the back of the wagon with the children. I spoke for all of them in transactions. It was safer that way. But within the boundaries of our land, we lived truthfully. The children called me father, first hesitantly, then with increasing naturalness. I taught them reading and numbers and how to judge the weather from the sky. Nita taught them their Cherokee heritage, the stories and songs, the proper way to honor the natural world. The scandal of our family gradually faded as newer gossip replaced it. We were left largely alone, which suited us. Occasionally, a new settler would arrive, unaware of our history, and treat us with ordinary neighborliness until someone informed them. Then the familiar pattern would repeat: awkward withdrawal, pointed absence from community gatherings. It hurt the children more than us. Chetan once came home bloodied from a fight at the general store, where a boy had called Nita a savage. Talise wept when she wasn't invited to a neighboring girl's birthday celebration. We could only hold them and remind them of their worth, which had nothing to do with others' opinions. People fear what is different, Nita told them. Fear makes them cruel. Is that why you hated father at first? Onakona asked with a child's directness. Nita looked at me across the table, her eyes soft with memory. I did not hate. I feared. But he showed me there was nothing to fear. By buying us? Talise asked, confused. By seeing us, Nita corrected gently. The years have passed more quickly than I could have imagined. The children have grown, most finding their own paths. Chetan works as a guide for the Territorial Survey. Noton joined him after overcoming his grief for Isa. Talise married a young Cherokee man from Nita's original clan, a connection found through persistent searching. Onakona has a gift for horses and runs a small breeding operation nearby. Diami, always the scholar, went east to school on a missionary scholarship, though he maintains his Cherokee beliefs. Abekwa, our baby, helps Nita with her healing work. learning the old ways while adapting to the new. Nita left us 3 winters ago. Pneumonia took her quickly, too quickly for goodbyes. I held her hand as her breathing faltered, promising to keep her memory alive for the grandchildren, to ensure they knew both sides of their heritage. $7, she whispered, a smile touching her lips even as death approached. Best bargain. They were her last words to me. I buried her on the hillside where we often sat watching the sunset. The children, adults now, placed cedar and sage with her, sang the Cherokee songs of passing. And now, Catherine, I approach my own end. The cabin is quiet these days. Abekwa visits daily, bringing her 2 small children who chase butterflies in the same garden their grandmother planted. They speak both English and Cherokee, moving effortlessly between worlds in a way Nita and I never could. I wonder if you have children, grandchildren. I wonder if they know anything of me beyond whatever bitter tales their grandmother shared. I wonder if you ever think of the father you left behind. I have lived a life I never expected. Found love where others saw only difference. Built a family from the wreckage of cruelty. I regret many things. My failure to stand against injustice more boldly, my inability to shield our children completely from the world's harshness, my silence when I should have spoken. But I have never regretted those $7. Not for a moment. If there is anything I would have you know about me, it is this. In a time and place where it was easier to be cruel than kind, I tried to choose kindness. Imperfectly, inadequately, but I tried. I hope, wherever you are loved. I hope you found your own path to happiness. I hope. The wind from the open window lifts the pages, scattering them across the rough-hewn floor. Outside, twilight deepens over the Oklahoma hills. Inside, Emmett Caldwell's hand falls still on the table, the letter unfinished. On the porch, unaware, Abekwa's children laugh as they chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, their voices carrying on the evening breeze, half English, half Cherokee, a bridge between worlds their grandfather and grandmother built with nothing more than $7 and the courage to see each other clearly.